There's something strangely magnetic about games that feel like they shouldn't work. You boot them up expecting a disaster, and somehow you can't look away. La Quimera is that kind of game. It opens like a forgotten VHS tape buried behind. A stack of sci-fi relics, gritty, glitchy, and unapologetically raw. The first few minutes hit you with awkward dialogue, stiff animations, and gunfire that sounds more like static than steel. But then, something shifts. You're dropped into the decaying heart of Nuevo Caracas, a city teetering between corporate rot and robotic extinction. There's no map to trust, no clear answers. Just your squad, your exo-suit, and 1,000 reasons not to care. Yet you push forward. Not because the game begs you to, but because deep down, it dares you to see how far this chaos goes. And that's the hook. La Quimera doesn't promise greatness, but it whispers something darker. Maybe you'll find something worth remembering in the wreckage. So let's step into the smoke. Let's find out if the mess is hiding something more. La Quimera is, in a word, janky. But it's the kind of jank that somehow pulls you in. This is a first-person shooter that wears its flaws like a badge of honor. It's not polished. It's not profound. It doesn't care. It just wants you to shoot, scan, cloak, and blast your way through a world that looks like it was patched together with leftover assets from a dozen different 2000s sci-fi shooters. And oddly enough, that kind of works. At its core, you're a private military contractor in a crumbling South American metropolis, where corporations run the show and killer robots flood the outskirts. You're given an exo-suit, a glitchy set, you have objectives, and a loosely held-together squad of edgy caricatures that talk way too much, and none of it makes sense. But the gameplay? Surprisingly snappy. Missions are linear, almost old school, and the gunplay, while limited, occasionally hits a sweet spot thanks to wall-piercing weapons and satisfying enemy pings. What La Quimera lacks in depth, it makes you up for in sheer chaotic energy. It's not trying to reinvent anything, it's trying to get you in, get you shooting, and maybe make you laugh at how ridiculous it all is. Think of it like a junkyard roller coaster. Rickety, risky, but kind. If unforgettable once the ride starts, ready to dive deeper. Let's talk about the world that barely holds itself together. La Quimera drops you into Nuevo Caracas, a fictional South American city that feels more like a war-torn fever dream than a grounded locale. Outside its crumbling borders, an unexplained robot apocalypse is ripping through civilization. Inside, corporate warlords battle for scraps, while civilians are left to rot in poverty. It's the kind of setting that screams grim-dark cyberpunk, but without the polish or coherence you'd find in, say, Deus Ex. Still, there's a kind of grimy charm to it all. You play as a freshly conscripted mercenary, thrown into a conflict that never really makes sense. One minute, you're rescuing a billionaire's daughter, the next you're forcibly augmented and dragged into a turf war between faceless corporations. The plot moves like it's being written on the fly, and characters spout lines that feel AI-generated after binge-watching Quentin Tarantino films with none of the wit. It's crude, chaotic, and frequently cringe-worthy. But here's the twist, it's not all bad. The environmental storytelling is where La Quimera actually shines. Take the Bone Wall, for example, a grotesque barricade built in blind panic. It tells a tragic story of desperation without saying a word. That's the kind of haunting visual lore that sticks. This world is broken, narratively and literally, but there's something compelling about watching it crumble, piece by piece, one absurd firefight at a time. At first glance, the combat in La Quimera feels like a relic from the early 2000s. Stiff animations, clunky reloads, and a tiny weapon pool. But give it a little time, and cracks in that surface start to reveal some unexpectedly fun mechanics. The gunplay itself is straightforward, even bare bones. You've got your sidearm, shotgun, or rifle, and that's basically it. No pickups, no experimental death guns mid-mission. Just what you bring with you and what little ammo you can scrape off the floor. But here's the kicker. Every exosuit comes with scanning, cloaking, and armored boosts. That scan feature? It's a game changer. Hit it, and you instantly highlight enemies through walls, turning every encounter into a game of who drops first. Combine that with wall-piercing bullets, and you've got a kind of budget-perfect dark experience that's surprisingly satisfying. That said, the mission structure holds it back. Most levels are pure A to B slogs. Shoot enemies, open door, repeat. Occasionally, you'll get a spike of creativity, like a tense shootout on a rising elevator, but those moments are rare. The game rarely gives you room to experiment, and most encounters blur together. Still, there's a strange momentum baked in, especially when ammo gets scarce. You can't just camp. Movement becomes survival. It's not refined, but it does push you to stay engaged, even if just barely. There's potential in this mess. You just have to dig through the smoke and bullet casings to find it. If La Quimera's combat is a rusty engine that somehow still runs, then its progression system is more like a car with no gas pedal. It's technically there, but it doesn't take you far. After each mission, you're rewarded with cash. Mercenary. Work, after all, doesn't come cheap. But the upgrade system is so shallow it barely qualifies as a system at all. You can invest in new weapons, sure, but with only a handful of guns and no meaningful customization, you'll quickly realize there's not much point. Most of the weapons feel underwhelming anyway, especially when you're forced to bring both ballistic and energy types to handle human and robotic enemies. There's no room for creative loadouts or tactical builds. You bring what works, and that's that. Then there are the exo-suit upgrades. On paper, you can tweak your head, arms, torso, and legs with slight stat changes, faster cooldowns, more medkit capacity, that sort of thing. But the improvements are so minimal, they barely impact your gameplay. It's the illusion of progression, without any real sense of growth. Even cash collection mid-mission feels broken. Your carrying capacity is oddly limited, so you'll hit a max cap before you even finish a level. The result, no reason to explore, no real incentive to loot. Just one more system that feels like it's waiting for a patch or a purpose. Now here's where La Quimera actually starts to shine. Co-op. Almost everything that feels tedious or cringe-worthy solo suddenly becomes absurdly entertaining when you bring friends along for the ride. The campaign supports up to 3 players, excluding the tutorial, and that simple change turns this clunky shooter into a hilarious chaos simulator. That awkward dialogue? Hilarious when you're collectively mocking it in real time. The linear missions? They move faster when you're coordinating scans and covering each other's flanks. Even the bare-bones combat becomes more dynamic when you're juggling cooldowns and watching your squad mates dive into gunfights with reckless abandon. It's not that the game improves mechanically, it's that it becomes funny, and sometimes that's enough. The campaign itself is short. You can roll credits in under 4 hours, and that might sound like a deal-breaker, until you realize that's exactly the sweet spot for this kind of game. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It drops you in, gives you some goofy suits and grungy guns, and lets you blow things up with your buddies before the cracks become too noticeable. And honestly, that's kind of the magic here. La Quimera knows it's a mess. It just hopes you'll bring a couple of friends, crack a few beers, and you'll laugh your way through it before it all falls apart. And for some players, that might be all they need. So, where does that leave La Quimera? Honestly, somewhere between accidental cult classic and early access cautionary tale. It's not a good game, not by traditional standards. The writing is embarrassingly bad, the systems feel half-baked, and the mission design rarely rises above serviceable. But despite all that, I didn't hate my time with it. In fact, I kind of enjoyed it. There's a scrappy underdog energy here, a sense that La Quimera was made by a team that just wanted to get something out the door, budget be damned. And while that leads to some serious rough edges, it also gives the game a weird charm. It's messy, loud, and frequently nonsensical. But it's also short, co-op friendly, and sometimes genuinely fun in that laugh at the game, not with it kind of way. If you go in expecting a polished, coherent sci-fi shooter, you're going to be disappointed. But if you approach La Quimera like a junk food movie night with friends, popcorn in one hand, controller in the other, it might just surprise you. Not because it's secretly great, but because, in its brokenness, it still manages to entertain. It's the kind of game you'll probably forget a week later. But you'll remember that one ridiculous line of dialogue, that glitchy shootout, and that moment when you and your friends couldn't stop laughing. And sometimes, that's enough.